Good morning, everyone. My name is Adriana Ramirez, and I'm a senior at Westfield High School. I'm also an anchor on KWHS, a student-led TV news broadcast. Thank you for joining us for today's Q&A on the 2022 Spring ISD Bond. For those of you who have logged on, you'll notice a link in the comment box where you can submit any questions you may have about the bond. So please send in your questions so we can make this as informative as possible. We have some questions that have been submitted in advance, but we want to make sure that we capture our live questions as well. As you may know, there is an election set for Tuesday, November 8th. At the very bottom of that ballot, you will find the 2022 Spring ISD bond propositions. These three propositions are designated as A, B, and C on the ballot. The $850 million proposal covers everything from safety and security, new construction, high priority maintenance, technology upgrades, and more. A little later, we'll dig a little deeper into these three propositions and what exactly they mean, but first, I would like to introduce our panelists for today's Q&A. First up, we have Dr. Lupita Hinojosa, who is our super proud superintendent of Spring ISD.
Good morning. Good morning to everyone that's out there watching us. Buenos dias. It is truly an honor to be here, to be able to share the information on our upcoming Bond 2022. Para aquellos que están con nosotros y quieren escuchar esta sesión en español, por favor vayan a Spring ISD o Spring Español en su página de Facebook. Pueden ver en su pantalla exactamente dónde deben de ir.
Next, we have Mr. Mark Miranda, who is the Executive Chief of District Operations. He's the man responsible for a lot of the departments that will be implementing the proposed bond projects.
Good morning, Adriana. I'm happy to be here.
And finally, we have Ms. Ann Westbrooks, the Chief Financial Officer for Spring ISD. She's here to help answer some of your questions about what this all means financially.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us.
In just a few moments, we'll begin answering questions from you, the Spring ISD community. But first, I'd like to ask Mr. Miranda to give us a quick rundown of the three propositions and what they all entail. Mr. Miranda?
Yeah, thanks, Adriana. So, as you've already mentioned, the bond proposition in total is $850 million. But that $850 million is actually broken up into three different propositions. There's a Proposition A, a Proposition B, and a Proposition C. Each one of them stands on its own, should be voted on individually. In Proposition A, we have lots of safety and security. There's improved district-wide safety and security throughout the district. We also have the rebuilding of Spring High School as a part of Proposition A. But we're not forgetting about some other campuses. We have Westfield High School, Jenkins Elementary School, and Reynolds Elementary School that'll get a refresh slash redesign. We'll be working with the communities on those particular projects. We also have district-wide high priority maintenance as a part of Proposition A, along with the replacement of several school buses and fleet vehicles. In Proposition B, it's $141 million for a single building, and that building is the Performance Education and Instructional Center. We did a lot of study with our bond steering committee and determined that about 80% of the use of this building would be for academics and arts. So this building would be utilized for STEM, CTE, performing arts events, theater. It will also be an event center for athletics. And then lastly, from a safety and security standpoint, it'll be a place that we would be able to use for site reunification in the event we ever had to evacuate a school. Those students could be transferred over to the Performance and Education Center, and we can reunify them with students, with their parents. The last proposition, Proposition C, is $28 million, and that's for technology. That's to replace and upgrade outdated district-wide technology and to improve instructional technology, so technology that will go directly in the classrooms. So that's a brief outline of the three propositions, and I'm sure we'll get into more details a little bit later.
All right, thank you, Mr. Miranda. Now let's get started with some of our questions. The first question we have through Facebook is, why is a bond election needed for Spring ISD?
Adriana, I'll take that question. And it's been 6 years since our last bond back in 2016. And as many of you know, so many new needs have come up, whether it's building, whether it's technology needs, or even safety needs. So the district is up for a new bond. And I also want to let our viewers know that did you know that the state of Texas only gives school districts funding for its operations. There is no funding if the district needs any new buildings, any technology, any safety upgrades. All that needs to come from a bond. And finally, that bond must be approved by the voters, right? Our board approves that we go out for the bond, and you, the voters, will approve that.
Thank you, Dr. Hinojosa. Our next question is, what are the financial implications for Spring ISD taxpayers if this bond passes? I keep hearing about an offset in taxes.
Well, thank you so much for that question, and that is definitely a fair question for any homeowner in Spring ISD. Right now, the estimated projected cost for the bond itself, if it's favorable on the November 8th election, is a total of 5 cents. So that means the tax impact is estimated to be an additional 5 cents above the $1.25 tax rate that we currently have. And so you keep hearing about the word offset because prior to this year's tax rate, our tax rate in 2021 was $1.31. And so this year, our Board of Trustees in September approved a tax rate of $1.25, so a decrease. That anticipated increase of 5 cents is largely offset by the decrease that the board just approved. So that's the offset that you're hearing everyone talking about, and that's when we compare the 2023 anticipated rate to the 2021 tax rate of $1.31. A couple of other things to note about the financial implications of this bond would be for our average homeowner. The average home in Spring ISD right now is valued at about $179,000. So for that average homeowner, the cost of this bond, if it is approved, would be about $89 per year, which breaks down to just under $7.50 per month for our average homeowner. And also, just to note, for our homeowners that are over 65, there would be no cost implications as a result of this bond because their values have been frozen in the year that they turn 65. So, great question.
Thank you. For our next question, we have, how were the most pressing needs for the district determined through the bond planning process, and who was involved in that process?
No, Adriana, and for our viewers, this process actually started last school year in the springtime. We started out by surveying our community, our parents and community members to see what they saw as needs and what their thoughts were about both facility, technology, and safety needs in the district. After doing that survey, I have to tell you, we also formed a steering committee. That steering committee was made up of over 70 community members, parents, teachers, principals, and even students. Afterwards, we had several people come through and talk to us about future needs of any school district. And most importantly, we hired an outside vendor to come in and take a look at our facilities again, do another evaluation. One that was done back in 2016, taking that information and now going back to see what our facilities, the state of our facilities. I have to tell you that this committee worked for over 6 months. Lots of long nights, lots of discussion. Finally, that committee came up with their recommendations, which we ultimately came to the board and they presented their recommendations to the board. The board unanimously approved it, and so now it's part of our bond referendum 2020.
For our next question, as a parent, student safety is a big concern. How will the bond election address safety needs for our schools and, more importantly, our students?
Yeah, thanks, Adriana. I think I can take that one. So I mentioned earlier that there are three different propositions in A, B, and C. Each one of our propositions actually has a safety component included in it. So Proposition A actually has safety and security in it. There are things like door security, which is one of the important topics across the state of Texas right now. So where we have broken or old and aging doors that need to be replaced, those will be a part of that. In 2016, we did a lot of work in the 2016 bond related to safety and security. We upgraded our access control throughout the entire school district. We also upgraded our surveillance cameras. Majority of our surveillance cameras at the time in 2016 were analog, and we upgraded the majority of them to digital. But there are still a few of those analog cameras that need to be upgraded to digital. So that'll be a part of this. We'll complete that process of upgrading our surveillance cameras to fully digital. We'll also increase the number of surveillance cameras that we have. There are some areas in our campuses that are blind spots that don't have camera visibility and we'll be replacing or adding cameras to be able to increase the density, the number of cameras that we have in our schools. There are other campuses that have fencing needs, perimeter security. We like to think of security in terms of layers of security, starting from the outside in. And so that perimeter facility fencing is very important and a very important part of that. Also mentioned in Proposition B, the Education Performance and Instructional Center would be a place that we would be able to use for reunification. If we ever had to evacuate a school building, for any reason, it could be a gas leak or some other threat, we would be able, currently, we would evacuate those students into the parking lot where they don't have access to food or water, access to restrooms, and they will be exposed to the elements. The Education Performance and Instructional Center would give us the opportunity to relocate those students to that center where they'll have an indoor facility that they can be housed out while we reunify them with their parents. And then thirdly, in the technology arena, part of the technology proposal, which is Proposition C, has a cybersecurity element. And so we'll be protecting our faculty, our staff, our students from cyber threats, cyber theft. We have a pretty good footprint right now from a cybersecurity standpoint, but we need to increase that and continue to stay in front of those people who would like to steal our data. And so, again, each one of the three propositions has a safety and security element, and it's a really big component of the bond program and what we're looking for.
Thank you, Mr. Miranda. And now for our next question. Why does Spring High School need a brand new facility? Where would students go during construction?
Again, I'll take that one, right? So Spring High School, when the steering committee that we talked about that met over the summer had all of the different priorities and all of the different needs, one of the things that we noticed is a lot of our campuses are getting a little bit older. But there's only one campus that we have in Spring that was built in the 1960s, and that would be Spring High School. So from an educational suitability and from an end of life, that campus rose to the top as the highest priority campus to be replaced. And so Spring High School will be replaced. Currently, the plans are to replace it on site at the current location. And those students would be able to stay in attendance at Spring High School while we build the new Spring High School if this were to pass. And so there would be no relocation of students. They would be able to stay there during construction. It will be a complex construction project. We've been talking about that from the very beginning as well. But it's definitely something that's needed for the building that has aged and really kind of outgrown its usefulness according to the age that it is right now.
For our next question, what would be the timeline to complete the two largest construction projects under the bond, Spring High School and the Event Performance Center?
Right, so that'll also be me. So the timeline. So I liken it to, and I've talked about this before, being kind of like a horse race, right? So if the bond passes in November, we would get funding in the early part of 2023. That would be on Ann's table over there. And once that funding is in place, all of the projects would release, kind of like a horse race. But just like a horse race, they go around the track at different speeds and they end at different speeds. The two largest facilities in this proposal would be Spring High School and then in Proposition B, the Education Performance and Instructional Center. Both of those would begin design in 2023. We expect both to have a shovel in the ground for construction by 2024. The Education Performance and Instructional Center is estimated to be complete by the tail end of 2025. And Spring High School, because it's more of a complex build that I described just earlier, would likely be the tail end of 2027. That would be it.
Does the bond include upgrades or enhancements for our middle schools?
Does the bond? So part of the bond is in Proposition A, right? Is our high priority maintenance. And so from a high priority maintenance standpoint, every campus will be getting something. In fact, on our website, I think we've talked about our website, springisd.org/bond. There are one pagers on the website that give you kind of an idea of what every campus is going to get. So every campus, middle and high school, elementary school campuses will get safety and security, will get the technology, right? And a few campuses will get some other things from a high priority maintenance, depending on the priorities of their campus. So there are lots of air conditioning that'll be upgraded. Some of our middle school campuses are in that category where they need upgraded air conditioning to replace end of life air conditioning units. And so you know how hot it can be here, and those will be replaced. There are boiler replacements. There are painting, floors, different things that will be happening in many of our campuses. If you wanted to check individual campuses, you can go online to our website and check your individual campus that you might be interested in.
Where would the Event and Performance Center be built? Does land have to be purchased?
We don't have to purchase the land. Visionaries in the school district a long time ago purchased a property that's now housing our Planet Ford Stadium. And so in the 2016 bond, Planet Ford Stadium was built, and that property still has enough room to be able to build the Education, Performance, and Instructional Center. And so it would be located near our stadium, and we don't have to purchase land for that.
We have a new Facebook question. How does the 2022 bond impact every student in Spring ISD?
Well, you know what? We're all looking at each other because the bond will impact every single student, just like you heard Mr. Miranda talking about each one of the propositions. Whether our students are riding buses, because we will be adding new buses to our fleet, whether we will be able to use the EPIC building, the Education Performance Instructional Center, to have YO events there, or whether we're just on our campus that's receiving all of the safety and security upgrades. Every single student will be touched. And, one of the real pieces that for me, from the instructional side, from the teacher side, because every teacher will be touched, therefore every student will be touched. Every teacher listening out there today, let me tell you, remember our laptops that we purchased back in 2016? Well, they're pretty old and clunky. I know mine is. So every teacher will be getting a new laptop. In our classrooms, we will be receiving new document cameras that allows the teachers to project the students' work. Also, those projectors that we purchased back in 2016, they're also at the end of life. And we're looking to replace those projectors, as well as providing screens, those large touch screens where students can come up to, instead of the chalkboard, like when we went to school, right, our students will have those screens that they can actually touch and manipulate. And ultimately, in our classrooms where every single student is, we have Chromebooks. Oftentimes, these Chromebooks are not charged like they're supposed to be. We'll have charging stations in every classroom. So if you think about what's happening in the classroom with the technology, every single student in Spring ISD will be touched, just like every single teacher will be touched through this bond.
You just touched on technology, so this question expands on that topic. Will students and teachers get new laptops and/or tablets? What other technology infrastructure needs to be addressed?
And Adriana, I just mentioned all of those pieces, which is what we as teachers and students get to be able to use, right? Those laptops, those Chromebooks, those projectors. But in order to make all those pieces work, I'm going to punt this question over to Ms. Miranda, because I do know there's a lot of technology infrastructure that has to go into place in order for the students and the teachers to have access to all this new technology in the classroom.
So Lupita, you mentioned the Chromebooks, and you mentioned the charging stations, and I wanted to touch on that just a little bit. Um, During the pandemic, we were able to release over 53,000 Chromebooks into the school district. And when we asked the principals, about their needs from a technology standpoint, one of the overwhelming things that they asked for were those charging stations. Most of those Chromebooks will still be within their useful life during this bond program. So the charging stations are going to keep them alive and working properly. And so the principals are really excited about that. So I wanted to mention that because they're excited about that. The things that people often don't think about, though, are behind the walls or in a technology closet somewhere else, and that's network switching equipment, right? It's great to have all the technology in the classroom, but if we're not able to connect, then it's not as useful, right? So um, we have cabling and network switches and network equipment that have to be replaced because they're at the end of their useful life. So many of those things are also included in this bond. We mentioned at the top of this, one of the reasons we need a bond is because there are no other funding sources to be able to do this, and so we'll use some of those funds for network switching equipment to be able to keep us connected. But I also mentioned before that there's safety and security components. I've already mentioned cybersecurity. Another component of the technology portion of this bond is our telephone system. Our telephone system was brand new in 2016. It was a new voice over internet system. And what we'll be doing as a part of this bond program is doubling the capacity of that telephone system so that if we ever had an emergency event, the number of telephone lines that could come in and out of the school district would be doubled, which we thought would be really important. So from a technology standpoint, there are a lot of great things, both classroom technology that you've already mentioned, but then the network equipment and cybersecurity to keep us online and to keep us safe.
Now we're on to transportation. Would the bond pay for new buses? If so, how many buses and other vehicles would be purchased?
Think I'll help with that one finally. Jump in here. So, yes, Proposition A does include some funding for vehicles, including buses. So, with our current cost estimates, we should be able to get about 60 new buses, and about half of those buses would be regular education buses. The other half would be our special education buses. But we also have included in Proposition A some other vehicles, some that we refer to as white fleet vehicles. So those are like our maintenance vehicles that you see up and down 1960 and throughout the district. Our distribution center, those white fleet buses that we use to deliver products to our campuses and departments. So that's our white fleet, and we should be able to get about 20 of those vehicles. And also, we have about 20 police cars that are included in there as well.
Can the bond be used to fund things like teacher salaries and or raises for other district personnel?
No. All of our funding sources are restricted for specific purposes, and we're not able to use bond funds to pay for things such as teacher salaries or raises or any recurring cost of that nature. No.
We have another question coming in. Since there are 3 bond propositions on the ballot, will I have a chance to decide on each proposition?
Yes, absolutely. One thing that we want all of our viewers to know is that the bond proposition for Spring ISD is at the very bottom of the ballot. I know Ms. Westbrooks calls it bottom of the ballot. And I was like, oh, okay, now I get it. So every voter will have a chance to go to the very bottom of the ballot and vote for each one of the propositions that you heard Mr. Miranda talk about. Proposition A stands alone, B, and C. So everyone will have that opportunity.
Speaking of voting, one viewer wants to know if they need to be registered to vote in the election before they can vote on the bonds.
Yes, they do need to be registered to vote. The deadline to register to vote in this election was on Tuesday, October 11th. So I hope everyone had an opportunity to get registered to vote. And also, as a quick note, is that early voting begins on Monday, October 24th.
Dr. Hinojosa, can you talk about the 3 things we need to know?
Definitely. There's 3 critical things that as a voter and our viewers that are out there that we to know and remember. First and foremost, that this bond proposal was created, was developed as a collaborative. It involved our entire community by either receiving surveys, being part of the committee, being able to provide us feedback. So this bond package was developed across the district. Also, for us, and you heard Ms. Westbrooks talk about that offset, right? we are expecting an offset on our tax rate from where we were to where we are projected to be. Also, for all of our older homeowners, you will not see a tax increase. Remember, if you're over 65. And then last but not least, what I just talked about earlier, that every single proposition, A, B, or C, every single student and every single teacher in our district will be positively impacted, whether you are taking part in our education performance instructional center or whether you are just in your classroom, you will be impacted. And so it is a well-rounded bond proposal created by our steering committee.
Is there anything else the panel would like our voters to know before we conclude today?
I think one thing we'd like for everyone to know is that there's always more time to ask questions. So if there's any questions that you didn't get an opportunity to get on to us today, there's a place on the website at springisd.org/bond where you can ask those questions and they come directly to the three of us and we'll ensure to get an answer to you really quickly. So there's still a chance to make sure you get all the information you need to be fully informed when you go to the polls.
So one of the things I want to add, and Ms. Westbrooks always adds, is the early voting sites, right? So we have, as Ms. Westbrooks talked about, early voting begins on Monday, and we actually have 3 locations within our district, and I see that the graphics have been put up. And so Big Stone Lodge, which is off of Riley Fuzzle Road, is one of the locations. And you don't have to be, that doesn't have to be your voting location. You can go anywhere, any of these 3 sites. Of course, Fallbrook Church, which is on Walters Road. And then just right across our administration building, Hosanna Lutheran Church. And so as long as you are a registered voter, you can go anywhere in these 3 early voting location sites to vote. And then, of course, don't forget November 8th to go to the polls.
Well, we are just about out of time. Thank you to our panelists for providing so much helpful information to the community, and thank you to our Facebook viewers for joining us today. We hope you all learned everything you need to know to make an informed decision on Election Day. But before we go, here are a few reminders. 1. Early voting starts this coming Monday, October 24th. Next, early voting runs through Friday, November 4th. During early voting, you can vote at any polling location in Harris County. Just be sure to bring your ID. Election Day is Tuesday, November 8th. To find a list of polling locations in Harris County, please visit harrisvotes.com. And remember, the ballot is long this year. Just remember, BOB, that stands for bottom of the ballot, where you'll find the 3 bond proposals. If you have any other questions, please visit the Spring ISD bond website at springisd.org/bond. Thank you again for joining us today. I'd like to thank Dr. Hinojosa, Mr. Miranda, and Ms. Westbrooks for being with us to answer the community's questions. Again, I'm Adriana Ramirez from Westfield High School. Thank you and have a great afternoon.